Bishop James D. Conley of the Catholic Diocese of Lincoln joins us to talk about your Pastoral Letter, A Future with Hope. Thank you, Bishop. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about the letter. What are the origins of the letter? Why did you feel the need to write it?
Well, it's a personal, reason, having my own difficulties with mental health and having to take a time off, a leave of absence, almost 11 months, exactly 11 months. That was about 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And then just the increase of mental health issues among young people, especially, that I run into, whether it be high school or college age or young adults, that it just seems to be a growing crisis of mental health illness. And having kind of walked a journey myself in this whole area, I felt like, well, maybe it's a good time to write something formally as a pastor, as a bishop. And I know that when I've mentioned my own story and my own journey in homilies and talks, it just seems to resonate with people, and they want to know more about it, and they like the fact that I'm talking about it.
When it comes to mental illness, how would you rank that issue compared with all the issues that we face as a Catholic Church and as a society in general?
Well, I think it's indicative of the culture in which we live, because there's a lot of reasons for mental health struggles, and there always has been. But I think especially with young people today, we live in a culture where information is coming at us from all different streams, and the amount of information and the amount of expectations that are placed upon young people to sort through all this information and to make sense of it and to wrap their heads around it, and then the expectations of what they're supposed to do in their life, it can be just overwhelming. And I think, all of us experience that. I mean, I didn't grow up in an age where you had 24/7 information coming at you from every possible, from your phone, but also from every source there is. It's confusing and complicated, and to make sense of that, especially for a young person who's just kind of coming into their own age and adulthood. So I just felt like that with my own experience, maybe this could help others that are struggling.
And in the letter, you also talked about growing up with that Midwestern work ethic. If you run into a problem, you just work harder. So that was kind of the mental framework that you have had for most of your life.
Right, yeah. My father was a hero of mine. He was a gunner on an aircraft carrier. He played professional baseball, and so he was just my hero. And he came out of that generation. They went through the Depression. There were 10 kids, they didn't have much, and he kind of fought in a war, and then came out, got married, and made a success of his life and business, like so many of that generation. And so the work ethic was, if you run into trouble, just work harder, and you can do anything. And, the sort of can-do attitude. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and which kind of was, as I've come to realize later on, and there's a lot of great things I learned from him, and a lot of wonderful virtues that he taught me, but also this ungodly self-reliance, that somehow you can fix everything, and which isn't true. I mean, we're not invincible. We're fallen creatures, and so coming to grips with our own vulnerability is really what I think was a great insight for me, and kind of broke that that idea in my own mind that I had to be invincible.
And when did you start realizing that you were struggling with your mental health? What were the signs?
Well, as I say in the letter, the first sign was not being able to sleep at night. And I've always had, I never had any problem sleeping. I could go to bed and hit the pillow and I'm out. But with what was going on in the diocese and in the church and the challenges we had, and just a number of things, I found myself night after night just laying there in bed and kind of rehashing in my mind the events of the day, the problems I was facing, trying to find solutions to these problems, kind of thinking as the bishop, I'm responsible for the outcomes of these decisions. And that, when you're the bishop, the buck stops with you, and so you have to make the final decision on a lot of things. I had a lot of consultation, people helping me, but I had that idea that, well, I have to fix all these problems. And so week after week, month after month, before I even realized it, that I was getting less and less sleep. And about 6 months into it, my body started breaking down. And my sister noticed it. Some of my friends noticed it. You look tired. You look like you're not resting, and all this kind of thing. And then I realized I wasn't resting, that I was really getting a good night's sleep. And so that went on for about 6 or 8 months. But I don't think I got a good night's sleep. Just kind of thinking through things and trying to figure out solutions.
And in the letter you also write about, at this time when you began to realize this, there was a concept of shame that began to eke into your life a little bit. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think, again, I mentioned to it as bishop, you're not supposed to show any weakness because you're a leader, like, many leaders, and, carrying the burden of leadership like so many people do. At least in our culture in America, you don't want to show any sign of weakness. And so if you do admit that, you don't have the answer, or I can't figure this out, then there's shame. It's like, why can't I? And you're the bishop, God called you to this, so you should be able to come up with these answers. And I felt like if I didn't, there was some sort of that I was faulty, that there was a shame there. And again, it's probably pride, that I wouldn't want to admit that I didn't have all the answers. And so that was there was a shame that kind of came with that. And that shame sort of continued to kind of lurk there behind everything.
And what was it that finally led you to seek a leave of absence?
Well, I was about a year into it, and again, not sleeping, and I finally, about 6 months into it, I said, I got to get a physical. So I went to the Mayo Clinic. So I have some friends there as the National Episcopal Advisor to the Catholic Medical Association. I know a lot of docs. And I had 2 really good friends, golfing buddies actually, that work at the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester. So I went up there and stayed with one family and got an executive physical, and top to bottom, And I had a psychological, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, major depressive disorder, anxiety, and tinnitus with this ringing in my ears. So I'd say probably early on, maybe the first couple months when I wasn't sleeping, I just noticed this. I woke up one morning and I had this ringing in my ears. Never had that before. Mm-hmm. And so I went down, and that's when I was diagnosed with that. And so then I came back and I began therapy, and I was prescribed some medication, anti-anxiety medication, and sleeping medication to get sleep, all those kind of things. So that was really kind of a breakthrough. It's okay, you need to get some help, and that's when I began that. But then it was a while before, another probably 6 months, that I finally, I thought I could muscle through it with therapy and with medication and just keep going. And I was still full time. I didn't take any time off. I was just keep working. And then finally, about a year into it would have been in October of 2019, my sister said, look, this isn't working. You just need to take time off. You need to step down. And I said, well, I don't think I can do that, as a bishop. And it was then that I talked to a couple of my brother bishops about it. Archbishop Conley, my best friend from over 50 years, Bishop Wall, Bishop Olmsted, Archbishop Lucas, and then finally it was at the November meeting of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, our annual meeting, our plenary, that I approached the Apostolic Nuncio. And I just shared with him, I think I need to take some time off. Is that possible? And he was wonderful. He was like a father. He said, yeah, you don't look very good. And he said, yes, take time off. You need to take some off. And so he said, but I have to find out from the Holy Father if that's possible. And so I came back after the conference in mid-November 2019, and then waited. And I had to give a retreat out at the retreat house. And it was during that retreat, the first week in December, that I got a call. And he said, the Holy Father has granted you this leave. So take the time, take how much ever time you need. I said, well, how long? He said, well, take as much time as you need to get better. You need to get your health back. And so I said, then I said, well, what should I say to the people? And he said, tell them the truth. Tell them you're tired. You tell them you need to take time off, and you're exhausted, and you need some rest. So that really kind of prompted the whole decision just to be absolutely transparent. Just to explain what has happened, and just like I'm just telling you. And that's what I put in. I had help from our communication staff to just lay it all out there. And so when I finally announced it on December 13th, the Feast of St. Lucy, 2019. That was the message, and I left the next day and went to Phoenix.
And shortly after you began your recovery, your treatment, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and that affected people across the world in a very difficult way, where they also began to struggle with mental health issues.
Right, which is understandable, because one of the first things that, yes, I was at a quiet place, a beautiful place, thanks to Bishop Olmsted, a nice retreat facility at the base of Camelback Mountain. It was sunny, the Valley of the Sun. But already I felt isolated because I was completely taken out of my normal, surroundings. So I'm already, in a foreign city, had some friends there, had good professional help, but I was feeling, it's like you're taken off the job and you're just, you don't know what to do with your time. So it was kind of an isolating feeling. And then, as I like to say it, I took, a leave of absence for health reasons in December, and then the whole world took a leave of absence for health reasons in March. Well, then that added a whole new layer of isolation, because not only, was I kind of isolated and out of my familiar surroundings at a new place, not close to friends or anything, home, then the whole world became isolated because nobody could be with each other, wearing masks, and we were all, in quarantine and all of that, which we all remember too well. So that added another layer of isolation, and it really kind of really taught me that this isolation and separation and division is bad for mental health. We are communal people. We're not hermits. We need each other. And when you isolate a community and a world, in this case, there's going to be mental health repercussions. And I think that's what brought on a lot of it, is that people could not commune with each other. They were separated from their families, from their friends, from their normal surroundings, support groups and things like that. You couldn't talk. You couldn't be with people. You could talk to people on the phone. You could Zoom, that kind of stuff, FaceTime, but you couldn't really have human interaction. And we are human beings, and we need human interaction.
So what were those days like for you when you were down in Phoenix? What was the day-to-day like?
Well, I had a very simple day. I would get up and go over to the chapel and say my prayers, and I would celebrate Mass. And I was actually doing some running, trying to keep up as best I could with, I'm a runner my whole life, so I would do some running on some trails. I climbed Camelback Mountain, I try to do that at least once a week, and just kind of get some physical exercise and to eat well, and to, just to kind of, and then I was having regular therapy once a week. I had a great medical doctor who was also, at the time, kind of the leading doc down in Phoenix with regard to the pandemic and the vaccines and all that kind of thing. He was right in the middle of that storm. And then I had a wonderful spiritual director who was a priest who's been released to live up in the mountains in Black Canyon, north of Phoenix, and he has a retreat facility up there, so people come up for retreats, spiritual direction, quiet time. So I would go up and see him once a week. So I had a whole routine that I worked out. I read a lot of books that I had been wanting to read over time. And so that was my routine. And then probably the thing that was and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the joy in my life just sort of dissipated. I didn't have a future. I didn't see hope. And that kind of slowly began to erode, and then I lost the joy in my life. And what kind of kept me going was really the fact that there were some young families that were students of mine when I was chaplain in Rome at the University of Dallas who had come back home to Phoenix after graduation, had gotten married. I had a couple of those weddings. They have family, they had kids, and one particular family that I became very close to, I was already close to them, who have 5 children. I ended up spending a lot of time at their house. And when the pandemic hit, I was invited over, since there was no public masses, I was invited over with Bishop Olmsted's permission to celebrate Mass in their home. And that was a game changer, and I spent probably 3 days a week with them in their home, and the kids, and they were going to school. And then, but one of the sons was my server, and so we had these little home masses, and that was a great thing. And we would grill outside, and just being around them, and they were totally understanding. They became a second family to me, as well as a number of other families. And then some friends of mine, in fact, the same doc that was up at the Mayo, he also practices in Scottsdale. Mayo Clinic has a facility in Scottsdale, and he was down in the wintertime, and he's a big golfer. I love golf, and so he would take me out to play golf. And then another friend from Denver who has a place down in Phoenix, he would take me out. So I got out and played golf a lot, and so golf was part of the therapy as well. So I had all these things going during those darkest months, which would have been January, February, March, April of 2020. 2020.
And during that time, what was the impact on your faith? Was it your own personal dark night of the soul?
Well, yeah, then the consolation that comes from faith really kind of disappeared too. It was just a struggle for me to sometimes just to drag myself over to the chapel to celebrate Mass. And as I mentioned in the letter, sometimes I didn't make it. I couldn't even say Mass. There was just this darkness, and prayer just seemed like, I was just saying words, and I didn't have any sensible consolation that God was present. Where are you, God? But I kept going, and my therapist was great. In fact, I quote him in there. He said, just show up. Just show up. Just keep moving. Don't stop. And sometimes it was hard just to show up, but I kept doing that. And that's where the Psalms from the Breviary became so important, those heart cries of the Psalms. And like I said in the letter, night prayer, Friday evening, there's a great line in one of the Psalms that says, my only companion is darkness, which is really kind of almost a bleak, way, but it also says, well, then other people have gone through this darkness, and and that's a companion for me now. Now my companion is darkness, so I have to walk with this darkness, and I can't stop. And so those months and weeks going through, up and through, and then for Holy Week, Bishop Wall invited me to come to the Diocese of Gallup to celebrate Holy Week, and so I was with him, but there were nobody at the church. It was just us. And the assistant at the cathedral, the pastor at the cathedral, a cantor, and we had the strangest sacred triduum I can remember, where there were no people. It was all live streamed, but we just were ourselves, and it was beautiful in a lot of ways, very monastic. But that got me through Holy Week and Easter, and then came back and continued. Then I went on a retreat up at Black Canyon with a number of others, with my spiritual director. And that brought me into May. And then I got a call from Bishop Wall and said, hey, I got a chance to get a puppy. Are you interested? Golden Retriever. His housekeeper's daughter had a Golden Retriever. Just gave birth to 12 pups on April 14th. And so I said, yeah, 8 weeks, we can go pick up some. Well, then the director of the retreat facility where I was staying, he said, I'd like to have one of those. And then his housekeeper wanted one. So we ended up driving to El Paso, Texas, and picking up 4 little 8-week-old Golden Retriever puppies. And that's when Stella entered into my life.
Stella. And she's been with you on your road to recovery and probably every other road in Lincoln as well.
That's right. I take her with me on confirmations. I take her with me to visit schools. The kids love her. She's more popular than the bishop, obviously. And she's been a great companion and just a great consolation.
So the pastoral letter is called A Future with Hope, and in it you talk about Jesus' words, apart from me you can do nothing, out of John. And those words really started to resonate with you. Why do you think that was?
Well, I had kind of fallen into this kind of dualism, in theological terms, kind of a semi-Pelagianism, and that is, Pelagianism is a heresy, and semi-Pelagianism is a sort of a quasi-heresy as well, where you feel like that, God is there, but he's sort of out here, and you're on parallel tracks. You're doing your thing, God's doing his thing, he's helping you, but you're basically on your own. And he comes in when you need him, and then when you don't need him, he's kind of running on, So that idea was really very much kind of embedded in me, and really when the truth is that God is with you, that everything you do is God working through you. He's not working beside you, he's working in you. And apart from him, even if he's like next to you, you can do nothing. He needs to be in you, and you need to be in him, and you need to be walking in sync, united, and that's what I was missing. And so that kind of drove home to me that it's not, me and him walking side by side, it's me and him together, united.
And in the letter, you also said St. Joseph played a role.
Yeah, St. Joseph, there happened to be a statue of St. Joseph right outside the window of this casita where I was staying, and this is, I was born on March 19th. Of course, I didn't grow up as Catholic, so my parents didn't know that March 19th was the feast of St. Joseph, so I should be Joseph and not James. But so he's always had a special place in my life, and that devotion to St. Joseph, because he was always there. He showed up. He showed up. He was always there. Didn't say anything. We don't have any words of Joseph in the Bible. But he was there for Mary, he was there for Jesus, and he was just always there. And so first thing when I'd look out the window, I see Joseph outside my window. And I walk by Joseph every time I go to the chapel. So then I decided to do this 30-day consecration to Joseph. And on May 1st of 2020, the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, I consecrated myself to St. Joseph. Reading that book by Father Don Calloway, which is a great book, but it takes you through 30 days of preparation for consecration to St. Joseph. So that was huge, and again, that kind of kept me going, just showing up.
Mm-hmm. And when you got back, you consecrated the diocese.
I did. So I got back in the first year. I think it was also on the May 1st of 2021 that I consecrated the whole diocese to St. Joseph, and it seemed like there's been a resurgence in devotion to St. Joseph. And so a lot of people have kind of rediscovered St. Joseph.
Looking back, what do you think was the turning point in your recovery?
I think that probably, when I came back, after, kind of coming to the end of my time in Phoenix, I still was not, and that was after 6 months, I still wasn't ready to go back to work. And it was pretty rough even during those months. And then there was a second wave of the pandemic, after the summer of 2020. And then it just kind of came back with a vengeance. And my therapist recommended that I shadow some bishops. And so, first choice was my good friend Archbishop Conley. So I went down to Oklahoma City, and of course, you couldn't, and we lived together, and I followed him, but he wasn't doing much either because everything was pretty shut down. But he had a daily routine, and I kind of followed him with that. I went to a lot of meetings with him, and that was good. And was out with his seminarians, and just whatever he would do, I would do. Then I came back to Kansas City. My mother was getting more ill, and that was a great time to spend time with her. As her health was declining, and we were trying to keep her from getting COVID, and she was in an assisted living facility, and it was very strict about the rules, and which was really difficult. And I know so many people, their loved ones, they were separated from them, and it's like through the glass. And the facility where she was were pretty, but I had limited time with her, and we had to be masked up and all that kind of thing. But I was able to sneak her out on occasion and spend some really good quality time with her. That was very helpful, being close to her. And then I shadowed Archbishop Naumann for about a month or 6 weeks, and living with another good friend, a priest, Father Richard McDonald, who's pastor of a parish of the Archdiocese of Kansas City. Living with him in the rectory there was good because I was kind of back in an ecclesial setting, and I was helping and actually doing confirmations in Kansas City, really waiting to get the word. And so I was I was in communication with the nuncio, and I told the nuncio, I think I'm ready to go back in a limited way. And then we had to wait. He says, well, I have to go back to the Holy Father, and as things, it takes a long time, and it was like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I was bugging the nuncio because I had to get back, and I was waiting. And finally, 11 months to the day, which would have been November 13th of 2020, the nuncio called and said the Holy Father's, and I didn't know, I thought maybe the Holy Father would say, no, I think it's best for you to retire. You really are kind of damaged goods, and you're probably younger, but he says I think you maybe I had all these things going through my head, but God's providence was that I was to go back, and then she said yes. The Holy Father's granted you permission to go back immediately, so I came back to the diocese and moved in on the 13th of November. But even those first months back, then in December my mother dies, so she died on the 19th of December. And that was rough. We had the funeral just before Christmas, and then I kind of those first 6 months back were, I was just barely functioning, but I was gaining some traction, and I was still in therapy, and I was still on medication, and I was just kind of going step by step, just showing up. But slowly but surely, I would gain more and more traction and more momentum. But the first whole year back, 2021, and we were still in the midst of COVID, was a hard year. But about the end of 2021 and beginning of 2022, things really started to get better. And 2022 was a better year. And then 2023, which would have been last year, was really, I really could just make strides, and getting everything back in balance. I was still going to therapy, finally got off medication, and then I really started to get, my strength back and my joy. In fact, when the joy came back, and it didn't come back all at once, but when it came back in full, and it was just even, times even more joyful than I can ever remember. And that's the way it's been most of 2023 and 2024. We're in May of 2024. And I just, as I mentioned to you, I just ran the Lincoln Half Marathon. Didn't think I would ever. Oh, and then I had surgery on my feet during all that because my feet were a mess, and I had plates and screws from both feet. I'm never going to run again. But I did, and I ran the half marathon, and that was a big benchmark for me to say, well, I can run again, and I can get back in physical shape. I lost a lot of weight purposely, and so I'm feeling a lot better, and life is good.
Life is good, but we live in a world, as we both know, that's struggling now with mental health.
Right.
It's becoming a real issue. We're seeing it in more people, and a lot of those people are younger. Do you think there is more issues of mental health now, or are we just better at recognizing it and bringing it to the forefront?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. I think that it's a combination of the slow removal of the stigma attached to mental illness and the importance of mental health. Now, I think people are talking about it because of one, there's more of it. And two, people are realizing that there's help out there and that there are people available for help and that you don't need to hide it. You can, just like diabetes, why would you hide diabetes? Why would you not tell anybody that you're a diabetic and not get medication for it? It's like any other illness. There's remedies for this. There's help out there. And I think more and more people, because everybody's touched by it. If you're not struggling from anxiety, or depression, somebody is. And so there's more awareness that it's there. And then, like I said at the beginning, we live in a culture now, especially for young people, where these expectations are unreal. As I think it was Monsignor Shea said at the Sikh conference in January, we live in a culture that permits everything and forgives nothing. And so there's this shame, and there's this expectation, and there's this demand, and I think people are buckling under this, and especially young people. It's overwhelming. And my purpose of this pastoral letter is to say, you're not alone. Don't be ashamed of this. Get help. Seek people around you who love you, who can help you. You can get through this. Just show up and get the help you need, and be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable, and you can do this. You can get through this. And so, with social media and with just the I think the volatile, divisions that are in our culture today, and even in our church, exacerbates the already sort of feeling of isolation and division that we have in our own souls. And so, I think it's the perfect storm, I think, right now. And this is why we hear so much about mental health. But I think the good thing is that there's more attention, too, on preventing people from getting to, like where I went. That there's preventative ways of health and wellness, of healing and wholeness, which is what I talk about, that there is a pathway towards healing and wholeness, and it involves a lot of things. We're body, mind, and soul, and so we have to attend to each one of those, our physical health, our spiritual health, our mental and psychological and emotional health, and we need to recognize the signs of neglect in those areas, and to get away from this thing that, I just got to tough it out and white knuckle it. But if I'm showing some signs of I need some help, well, reach out. There shouldn't be any shame of going to a therapist to kind of bounce things off of. I continue to stay in touch with mine. And just like you would have a spiritual director, there's no shame in going to a spiritual director, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then why would there be any shame going to a therapist? And I think that's being broken down. That's being diminished, which is good. That's a healthy thing.
And so for a Catholic, what role can the church and the sacraments play in maybe confronting those issues they're dealing with regarding?
Well, it's a great question, because you can't pray yourself out of this. Prayer is very important, and Jesus is the healer. He's the one that can heal anything, and he needs to be the first one you go to. And I mentioned this in the Pastoral Letter. You turn to God first, and the sacraments, because those are supernatural powers that transcend every kind of power. But, as St. Thomas says so beautifully, grace builds upon nature. And if your physical nature is suffering, then grace can only do so much. Grace can't heal that. You need to seek the healing that comes naturally, through psychology, through medicine, through, physical exercise, through diet, through sleep. All these things that are on the natural plane that we have a responsibility as stewards of our bodies to tend to. And we need to do that. That's all the part of love your neighbor as yourself. You can't love your neighbor unless you love yourself first. And so loving self means that you're taking good care of yourself. You're attending to your natural needs. And then the supernatural builds upon that in prayer and the sacraments especially. Scripture can be a great consolation, because everything's in there to tend to your own heart cries and your own sufferings. And Jesus, he's on the cross. He went through everything we are going through. So Jesus knows what it means to be isolated, to be abandoned, to be forgotten, to be lonely. Everybody abandoned him on the cross, right? Except for his mother and St. John. But so Jesus is the example. And I quote that great passage from the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, that in Christ reveals man to himself. He is the perfect man. And it's in Jesus that we see our humanity. And the more that we become like Jesus, the more we flourish humanly. He's the key. And so it's a combination of putting that straight, first, not parallel on a semi-Pelagianism, like I'll do my part, you do your part, God. No. He does everything. But you have to cooperate with that. And by cooperating means getting your whole physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual house in order, and seeking the help you need when you're failing in any of those areas.
And are you at the point now where you can look back and see God's hand in any of this?
Yeah, I never thought I could say this, but in the darkest moments, it's just like, Lord, you've left me. You're gone. I'm on my own. And I said, why? Why have you cut me off? Why have you left me? And now looking back on it, and I use that analogy of the moon. You know, there's sometimes in the lunar month that you look up and the moon's gone. But you're looking right at it. You just can't see it. It's there. And you can't see it at the naked eye. And it's with God, you know, he hasn't left us. He never leaves us. But we think he's left us. And but now I can look back and say that he was there all along. It was the moon that was, you know, dark during that time, and I thought he was gone, but he was there all along, and I didn't know that, but I know it now.
So, what do you hope this pastoral letter on mental health, A Future with Hope, will accomplish?
Well, I hope and pray that it would resonate with people who are struggling, or I hope and pray that it would be helpful. We offer a lot of resources at the end of this letter, a lot of good, solid, time-tested Catholic resources that are very, dependable and reliable. That people, if people are suffering from any mental illness, or if they know family members and friends that are, that they point them in this direction. You know, that they let them know first they're not alone and there's help out there, and that they seek that help. You know, that they make that step. And I've had people just since I've been back and preaching about it, different venues, tell me and write to me, say, you know, you gave me the courage. If a bishop can do this and step aside and get help, then a priest can, or a sister, or a husband, or a wife, or somebody's son or daughter can get help. Parents can get help and not worry about, you know, what the family might think about, you know, a son or a daughter that needs help. That we look at it just like we look at any other health crisis. And we do have a crisis in mental health.
So do you have any regrets about being so very public with your journey, because you didn't have to be?
No, I have no regrets. In fact, I think if I wouldn't have been as public and as transparent with it, all my whole journey, I don't think I'd be where I am today. I think I wouldn't have attended to everything like I did.
So the letter is called A Future with Hope. Is that how you would describe the battle as a church and a society that we're in right now against mental illness? Do you think it is a future with hope?
I think it gets to the heart of really where we are in the world today. You know, there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of people who don't believe anymore. You know, and if you don't have a future, if you don't believe that there's a future for you, that there is, that God has a plan, you know, in your life, and it's a beautiful plan, and not only in this life, but in eternal life, that there is an eternal life that's awaiting you, that you're participating in right now, and that's the basis of hope. And that hope that you have in a future that's beautiful and fulfilling and filled with truth and goodness and beauty that you are destined for. If you don't have that hope, you don't have joy, true joy. I mean, you can be somewhat happy in this world, and material wealth can bring a certain amount of happiness, but if you don't have the hope in permanent things, then you don't have joy. And if you don't have joy, then, you know, it's a rough road. You know, life, is some people then, unfortunately, and I haven't talked about this, but the suicide rate is very high because people don't see a future, right? They don't think life is worth living. And I understand. I have to say, I thought about it, you know, intellectually. I would say I probably didn't have suicidal ideations. But I didn't think about it. And I could understand why someone would think that this is the way out. I understand that now. I don't think I understood that before. So, and I know a lot of people have those ideas, but you have to get through that, because that's not the answer.
What's your message? If you could sit down and talk to someone who's thinking about suicide, what would be your message to them?
I would say, wait, don't. Seek help. Just show up one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time, and keep moving forward. Because in the end, we don't determine who lives and who dies. Our own self, our own lives, the lives of others, the unborn, for example, the elderly. That God is the steward of life, and He alone determines when we die, and we can't do that. God, that's God's domain. That's a sacred domain, and that's a wonderful. If you have hope and joy, you know that the future in eternal life, you have to go through death, and usually you have to go through suffering. But that's a sacred moment. In fact, we just buried a woman who was the mother of my administrative assistant, and she was walking that, and I was able to walk a part of that journey with her. And to see someone filled with faith go through and pass through death, surrounded by the sacraments, surrounded by people who love you, surrounded by prayer, and being accompanied in love. That's the hope. That's the hope of a future, because we're all going to have to face death. We don't like to talk about that. I'm in the fourth quarter. I'm hoping I'm getting some overtime, But, I think about death because I think about, gosh, how did I get this old? How did it happen so quickly? But then again, at the same time, Jesus says, I think 55 times in the New Testament, be not afraid. I've gone there before you. I've led the way. And we just have to follow Him to the other side.
You've said you've been through the darkest days. You said the joy is now back. So is it safe to say when you look at your own life personally that it is a future with hope as well?
Absolutely. I'm starting to, I'm thinking I've got a lot more things to do, more than I ever thought I had. And there's more things. And so I want to, so in fact, my staff, God bless them, they're great. They have to slow me down. They really do. Say, wait, Bishop, you're getting ahead of yourself here, and because I have all these things I want to do while I'm still healthy and relatively young. If we're a bishop, I still got a few more years before my sell-by date, and I want to accomplish a lot in the years I have left, how many of the years those are. And so there is an excitement about things I want to do. Not just me, but I want to leave for my successor, and I want to leave for the diocese. I want to leave the diocese. It's already in great shape. I love my diocese, but I want to leave it even better because I know that the future, and I was thinking about this the other day, that I look at young people, and in some ways, I wish I was younger, not because I want to live longer, but I want to see what's going to happen in 15, 20, 30 years, because it's going to be like the early church. It's going to be persecution. It's going to be, the church is not, the world is not going to get any better from the point of view. I think this secularism and sort of this godlessness is going to continue. But just like in the early church, the Lord is going to raise up missionary disciples, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see the saints of the future who are going to go into this future, which is going to mean persecution, but there's such that this is all part of God's plan, and it's going to be a church that's going to be alive with the Spirit. And I kind of miss the fact that I probably won't see that, like the college students today.
No, we certainly hope you do. That's a future with hope is the Pastoral Letter, Bishop James D. Conley of the Catholic Diocese of Lincoln. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for being so open about it. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much.